safeguarding issue is raised, then it has to be escalated to the safeguarding manager within the school, and then the safeguarding manager or the safeguarding team will then make a decision as to what's going to happen. And that tends to be 100% black and white, full stop, end of story. The important part of the school policy is that parents should be aware of it, which means that if it's not up on the website, then it's easily accessible, because you would think, and I emphasize the words you would think, that if a child goes into any form of excuse me, coaching or counselling within the school environment, the parent's going to be aware of it in some way, shape, manner or form. And consequently, the school has a duty of care at that point to say, well, look, we're happy to deal with this. This is the way that it works. Just to give you the heads up, this is how we work. This is what confidentiality is. This is what you're going to get to know. And then the open question to them is, does that work for you? Is there anything else that you want to add? Now, a parent at that point might say, yeah, I'm comfortable with what you've said. Or they may turn around and say, no, I want, if there's anything that I need to be aware of that affects the health and welfare of my child, then, I want to know about it. And then you would enter into that discussion about, right, do you mean everything? And if that's the case, then the child also needs to know that. The language, this is another important part as well, the language that is used will depend upon the age of the child as well, because if you're, for example, and you're not wanting to do anybody a disservice, if you're 8 years old and somebody turns around to you and says, right, let's talk about confidentiality and safeguarding issues and how it's escalated to the next level, they're going to look at you and go, yeah, what? So the language is important. The other part of it as well is, letting them understand in their language. And this is where you have a lot of respect for people who coach children, especially younger ones, because you have to use their language in the sense of, look, there's a reason why I might need to tell somebody else, and that is to make sure that you're all right, that nobody gets hurt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when we're talking about safeguarding, we're talking about anything that can happen to anybody under the age of 18. Now, the NSPCC have some policies around counselling and coaching, as far as adolescents, what their view is in terms of that. As it happens, I haven't got around to it yet, but excuse me, my plan is actually to contact the NSPCC probably later on today and just say, look, we have an awful lot of members now who are coaching either within school or out of school. People under the age of 18. Do you have any guidelines in terms of the confidentiality bit? So if you haven't done that, I'm hoping to get that done today. So if not tomorrow, and see, and when I've got that, I'll just I'll forward it either directly to you or via Dawn. When it comes to, sorry, just bear with me a second. One of my dogs is going bonkers. Yeah, had a quiet word. When it comes to working with people under the age of 18 outside of school, so a parent contacts a coach directly, or that individual contacts the coach directly, that opens up a completely different a different set of rules. Some of them are much the same, because you would anticipate that anybody who works in that environment adds safeguarding issues to their list of things that under certain circumstances, so they can be broken. It is as this Dawn has just put in the chat, it's an incredibly complex area. But one of the things that that needs to be taken into consideration is what are the general child protection rules, with regards to the Children's Act. the fact that, so like, if people are working with people under the age of 18, usually you need some sort of parental consent, like, anyway. Or at least it might be something that is explored to ask that question, are your parents aware of this? Have you come, like, through them? If the parents are involved at the early stages, then there's a conversation to be had there around, what are you expecting in terms of, like, confidentiality? And this is where you get one of the interesting aspects, because let's say, for example, so like a parent brings, like a child, so like for coaching, the child, like is happy to have the coaching. The parent says, I'd really like to know everything that goes on. And the child then divulges that, like, one of the issues about what's going on is the parent. So there are a number of sort of, like connotations there within that. Now, Dawn's put a couple of links into the chat box, which was a little bit of research that I did, knowing, so like, that your question was coming up. And one of the things that it really comes down to is the contracting piece. So when you contract either with the parent or, with the parent and the child, which makes it a sort of like a three-way contract, it's at that point that it has to be quite clear, if not categorically clear, what is going to be confidential, so like, and what's not. Now, if I take an example, because Yvonne works in school, she works with the SEN children. The rules that they have are quite stringent, which is inside or outside of the school, if anything comes up that is a safeguarding issue, it gets escalated to somebody. Within the school, it's the safeguarding team. Outside of the school, a coach needs to have a mechanism of, if I'm going to escalate this, who am I going to escalate it to? And it's one of the things that, we talk about the confidentiality piece. If we talk about it, like, generally, we say there are certain things that would need to be divulged. So, harm to self, harm to others, acts of terrorism, illegal activity. And in the case of working with children, safeguarding issues. Excuse me. One of the things that is less clear, because coaches look at that, and generally, and I put myself in the same category of going, yeah, I totally subscribe to that. I make my clients aware. The next question is, if that is divulged, who do you actually escalate it to? Because it's somebody's divulged, illegal material. Do I say to them, look, can you just hold the call? I just need to call the police and and get this sorted. So there needs to be that for the coach themselves. They need to understand that, look, if I need to report this, who am I going to report it to, and how am I going to report it? And the contracting piece, the bit that says, look, if XYZ comes out, I'm going to do something with it, allows you then, to have no repercussions from somebody turning around and saying, look, you said that this was, completely confidential. For children, so it's equally the same, not just from a legal point of view, but from a moral and ethical point of view as well, of what is a coach comfortable dealing with, and what would they be comfortable withholding, and what would they not be comfortable withholding. So that's a sort of starter for 10.
Ian, you're on mute.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
How does that answer your question?
It answers it in that basically my understanding from that is schools follow school policy, which I was always happy with anyway. Private coaching of minors, yes, the parents do have a legal way to demand information, but that should be sort of pre-discussed prior to any coaching. And normally they would have identified their children to the coach rather than the child coming to the coach anyway. there could be situations where a 17, 18-year-old or 17-year-old, 16-year-old, under their own steam, under their own means, seeks out a coach and says, "Look, I don't want you to tell my parents." Where do you stand then?
I think there's a discussion to be had there around what the actual content is, because if first and foremost, so like coaches aren't Samaritans, so whereas a Samaritan might turn around and say, yeah, we understand self-determination, you can tell us whatever it is. When somebody comes and says, look, I don't want my parents to know, there's a conversation to be had there around, look, there are, I appreciate that, I can appreciate it must be a difficult topic, blah blah blah. However, there may be some things that I am legally, morally, and ethically obliged to, if not your parents, either advise somebody else or at least encourage you and invite you to tell somebody else. And part of that conversation might then lead to, because without blatantly going, okay, tell me what it is and then I'll tell you what I can do with it, because then they tell you and they go, oh, I'm sorry, I can't keep that confidential. So that conversation is really important. In terms of because again, if it's and there is the other thing as well. So in terms of whether they're talking to you online, or over the telephone, or whether they're actually coming around in person. And one of the things that that we also need to take into consideration is signposting. So child rocks up, I want to have a conversation with somebody. I don't want you to tell your parent, my parents. Right, okay, fine. So as a coach, which is is different to other people that you depending upon their age, is different to counselling, psychotherapy if they're older, is different to other people that you might seek help from if they're younger. So there are certain things that unfortunately I might not be able to either keep from, if not your parents, I might need to tell somebody else for your own safety and for your own welfare. However, there are other people who can help, and I'm thinking about the likes of Childline, for example, who have different rules and may have a different way of approaching things. Can you at least tell me a little bit about about what this is about? And from that point, if you get a snippet, because there's a difference between I've been to bunking off school and my parents are going to find out about it and they're going to go nuts and they're going to take away my iPad, versus I've got into a lot. I've been recruited by the local county lines drug dealing crew, and I don't know how to get out of it. Neither of which are really coaching topics, and both have different routes. Well, one of them probably is, but so it's that that question there, because one of the things around stuff that comes up like that tends to send the mind racing about who, what, where, when, why, rather than just working with the the individual around, right, what is it that's going on for you, what do you want to happen, who else can help, type of thing. And it does come back to that important point of, if I don't tell anybody, is my client likely to get into into trouble, and by trouble, make matters worse, whatever they may be. Is there a danger of of harm to them? If something does happen to them and I haven't disclosed it to anybody else, am I legally, morally, and ethically correct, or am I legally, morally, and ethically incorrect? What I've done. So it is, I mean, so like Adele's worked in this area, and we've got others who work with it all the time. It is a bit of a sort of like a moral and ethical minefield. And I think the sort of the stake in the ground is you simply say, in my opinion, I don't work with people under the age of 18, for this very reason, for one thing, is that, look, probably the primary question, am I the right person to help with this issue? If I am, and it's a coaching thing and I can deal with it, then there's probably not that much that's going to come out of it, because it might be about homework or bullying at school, or something like that. In which case, the coaching process might encourage them to find other support through the questions of who else can support you, who else have you thought about going to, and everything else that comes around that. Anything that starts to step across, in my mind, anything that starts to step across into this is a safeguarding issue, that is going to have an effect. And that's not to say that bullying and harassment doesn't, but something that looks like, this could get more serious than it actually is, and might lead to harm to the individual, would fall into my category of, this is something I think that that needs to be escalated. Which means that you're either going to be doing it yourself, and that could equally be, just contacting the individual's doctor, or a head teacher at school, or something like that, and just letting them know that that's probably the probably the best course of action. But there are there are other other bodies out there. Probably the people who do individual counselling with people under the age of 18 will have their own guidelines. So as well as the NSPCC, the BACP, the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, I might probably drop them a line as well, and just see what their stance is on it, because it's coming up more and more. And I know that since lockdown, the calls to Childline and other sources have gone up. I think Yvonne was saying something like 35 to 45%. So that there's a lot of stuff that's going on that wasn't going on before lockdown.
I think that's a really good idea, David. If you can do some more research, and I've just recorded Ian's question and this snippet, because as you say, it does come up time and time again. And it's interesting, Ian, when you talk about 16, 17, maybe 18-year-olds, but certainly 16, 17, in some countries they're old enough to get married, drive a car, etc. And if they can pay for their own coaching because they've approached you directly and said, I don't want you to tell my parents because I'm living at home or whatever, who is your responsibility? Who is the client? And it's a very complex area. So any research and guidance that we can put out as a blog with this snippet of this call today that I've recorded, because that was a really in-depth response. Thank you, David. I'm so glad you came on this morning after all. You responded to that question much better than I could have, not least because Yvonne, your partner, is actually in this field as well. So Ian, how does that help you and reassure you with the case study that you have in mind?
It reassures me that what I have discovered in my research is actually where we're at. My fear was that I was missing out on something, and that others may be too, because having looked at various sites, including the BACP, including the International Coaching Federation, including a couple of council sites for safeguarding, and also being a school governor myself, there was this big area that didn't seem to have any position of strength for coaches, counsellors, psychotherapists, that the legalities were on the side of the parent, which obviously makes any coaching, therapy, counselling sessions very tricky when actually you want to be able to allow the clients to have that free range of confidentiality. And so therefore the idea of signposting is I think very, very pertinent, knowing that there are various areas, especially in UK, that we can approach in order to help. And perhaps there may be an area where actually there's the question to ask is how or what can you do to be able to encourage the client to be able to front up to their parents, and a little bit of hand-holding if necessary.
Well, the fact that you sent your question in advance obviously meant that we could prepare a little bit more thoroughly than just thinking off the cuff. So thank you for that. It's a good tip for our future sessions. Any meaty questions like that, send it to us in advance, and then we can involve the head of professional standards, and David and I can discuss and come back to you with the fullest possible answer. So thank you.
I think it would also look good, if we do go down on along this topic, it will look good on the IAPC&M website, because it'll be a lead which is not apparent anywhere else, and that can only be a good thing.
And as David said, it's coming up increasingly, not just because of lockdown, but that's certainly highlighted it. But as you know from the work that we've done with Raquella and other coaching, educating organisations within the IAPC&M, we've actually got a huge amount of people who work in this field, hence creating the special interest group and the documents that pull all this information together, so that you've got a reference that is kept up to date with what is going on. Okay, great question. Thank you for that. And thank you, David. Does anybody else on the call, because I can see quite a few people have joined us now, got any experience in this field or anything else that they want to add in response to Ian's question about confidentiality and coaching minors?
Hello, everyone.
Hello,
I just want to say it's not my expertise working with minors, so I'm just 18 years and above, so it's not my thing. I'll leave it to others. Isn't it headache, Ian, working with minors? Or it's fine? I don't know. I never tried it.
I haven't done much yet. I'm effectively a student at the moment, and one of the things I am doing is the adolescent coaching additional training that is provided, with a plan to be able to support 11 to 18-year-olds, particularly through schools, but obviously there is an area of the private approach as well. And having two teenagers, age 14 and 12 now, it helps me to help them, and also to be able to understand a bit more and support their friends should I need to. And that's really where I'm coming from, is sort of a multifaceted target here, not only to work formally, but also through the through parenting.
Well, it's certainly a growth area, that's for sure. So we have to know what's what and stay on top of it. So thank you for that, David. And as I say, great question, Ian. Thank you.